So let me put here me on center stage. Come on. So you should be able to see me here. Let me get out of there. Get that off of there. Come on, get off of there. That's what. Go away. Why are you not? Why are you not going away? Sometimes this interface just drives me bananas. And every once in a while they do I don't want speaker view. Let me do it this way. Here we go. I'll spotlight me and that should do it. Okay. So good morning for those who are at us on Zoom. I'm going to try and get this set up here so you can see my vise a little better. I'm going to try and get that up just here. I'm going to stand up my iPad a little bit. My God, darn it, it's following me around. Go away, speaker view. Quit. Sorry, this is just driving me nuts this morning.
Do they not have a fly view?
Yeah, for some reason it's not letting me turn off speaker view. I don't want that. Let me go here. Maybe I can. Let's do that. Let's zooming again. Gallery view. Gallery view, that might work it there. And then go down here. Spotlight for everyone. Okay, that seems to have got it more or less. Okay, so we'll start with the hook, which is a Mustad 9671, which is, darn this thing, I really don't know what's going on here. I had a software update on my iPad, and I think it's just changed a bunch of stuff. There we go. It went away. Had to disturb my setup last night because we had visitors. So we relocate everything this morning. All right, now it looks like we're in business. So 9671 is a 2x long hook with a 1x X stronger wire. And it's just a little longer than a standard wet fly hook, a hair longer, which for these nymphs, if you're thinking of any pattern that starts as a swimming chironomid type pattern, as they go from chironomid to emerger to adult, they get about half size on each one of those phase changes. So if you were to tie a chironomid for this particular one, you'd want one that's probably another X or two long. But to go to the dry fly as being a regular dry fly number 12, you probably want a 2X long for the emerger, which is what this is. So this is a size 12, and I'm using brown thread, and it's 6/0. And I'll just start right at the eye of the hook and make sure that, because you're using a fine tippet, you don't want the tippet to get caught in that little space where the eye isn't quite closed. And I'll wrap back to the bend. Now this hook I've already debarbed and filed down, so it's not going to be catching any threads that your fisheries guy is gonna check it. The tail is a pheasant tail, and I'm going to use, I'd say 5-6 strands of the pheasant tail, and I'm going to pull it right off the stem. And this tail will be a little bit long because this is an emerging mayfly. It might have a little bit of trailing shuck. So I'm going to make the tail a little less than shank length, right at the bend, and do a pinch wrap on that just to make sure that it stays on top of the hook. And I will wrap up the shank of the hook because I don't want a big bump at the back. When I get up to sort of the thorax position, I'll trim that off. And then I'll go back down the hook shank. And to make sure that tail doesn't wrap around the bend, I'm going to make one wrap underneath behind the tail, bring it up snug, and then wrap in front. And what that does is that keeps the tail from collapsing around the bend of the hook. And of course, we assemble these things, if we're going from back to front, we assemble these things with the material that goes forward last, gets tied on first. So the first thing is this particular insect has a little medial line, a light colored medial line down the back. And for that, I've got some white floss. I'll cut a little piece of that off. Bring the thread up again. Oops, sorry. I need to get reverse order. First thing is some wire. And unfortunately, I don't have a magnet on my wire spool like Florin does. So this is a rib, and it's basically a fine silver wire. Now bring the thread back up to the front because I want to make, it doesn't matter if I have a little bit of bulk here because the body's going to be a dubbed body. And I'll wrap this right down on top of the hook, right back to the tail. And because I don't have a magnet, I have to cut it off the spool. So I got a little length of wire here. I'm going to do the same thing with this white rib that I'm going to put on it, or marking on the back that I'm going to put on it. When we talked about the other day, somebody at the club was saying, you got to remember to spin your bobbin. When you take these threads like uni thread, they tend to, when you wrap them around the hook, they tend to unspin them. So every once in a while, you want to give your bobbin, when it's hanging down, a counterclockwise spin. And the reason for that is that when you make a soft loop, if the thread is spun the wrong way, the soft loop falls to the front of the eye of the hook. And it's really tough to trap material if you're doing that, if you're just laying it down and doing that soft loop to trap it down. Spinning the bobbin counterclockwise makes the loop fall towards the back of the hook. And that makes it a lot easier to trap small bits of material onto the hook shank. So at this point, I'm going to use a dubbing, and I've got stuff that Awesome Possum, which has a rusty brown, which is what the pattern called for, sort of a reddish brown dubbing. And this possum dubbing is really quite nice because it will cling to the hook fairly well. And it's fine enough that it's fairly easy to spin on. Just to help that out a little bit, I've got a teeny bit of dubbing wax, and I'm just going to put a little bit of dubbing wax on the thread so that I can get the dubbing to adhere, because this Awesome Possum has not got a lot of little Barbie bits to make it easy to spin on the thread. So dubbing wax actually helps. And I'll spin really tightly. I'll spin that on, just rolling my thumb and forefinger like that, or on the thread with a little pinch, and make it fairly fine. And slide that up to the fly. And I'll put a little more on. And this takes a while if you want to make a nice even body. You want to not have it too much different in diameter on your thread. So when you get that stuff on, just slide it up to the hook and you wrap. And I'm just going to do a wrap up, nice and skinny. And I'm going to do a fair bit more than you would think the body runs, because it doesn't matter if I carry the body forward past where the thorax would be, because I'm going to wrap over top of the body with the peacock thorax. And this just makes that whole process a little easier. Now, the next thing we do is we want to put this rib on. And I have a piece of silver wire. I'll use my Hackle pliers to grab that wire. And I'll make nice, even counter wraps. I'm going opposite to the direction that I wrapped on the body. And the purpose of that is it just ensures that the material on the body doesn't spiral out on you when you wrap the wire the same direction. It has a tendency to do that. And then when you get to the front here, I'm just going to hold the wire out of the way, wrap over top a couple of times, pull the wire back, a couple of wraps in front, and all that little finished part is going to end up under the thorax. Take the wire out. Now this little black or white marker that goes over the top, in order to do that, I need to spin the floss to make it nice and tight, because it's just a little highlight. It's not like a shell back on this insect. And I'll just lay that down right on top and wrap over top. I want to get it right on top of the body. So, and pull it nice and snug. Tie it back. And that's the little mark on the back. Apparently these insects have a little mark on the back. So much for that. And then we'll take about 2 to 3 strands of fairly fuzzy Peacock Herl. These short ones tend to be a little fuzzier than the really long ones. So one of the things I have is I have really long Peacock Herl, and then I have the shorter stuff. And the shorter stuff I think tends to be a little fuzzier. So I'll take those strands and tidying them up. I hate dropping that stuff on the carpet because then it's son of a gun to get up off the carpet. I tie in the living room because my wife has usurped the entire dining room for her sewing projects. I'll tie those down like that. Bring them back to the body. And I'm going to wrap it, the Peacock Herl, with my thread at the back. And all that is I'm going to get a nice chunky thorax by wrapping the Peacock Herl over itself really nicely. Because this is a 6/0 thread, I can just spiral the thread through that thorax a little bit, and that'll cinch down the peacock so that if fish tooth gets in there, it's not going to come unraveled. And you'll see that I'm leaving a good eye width between the eye of the hook and where the thorax ends. And that's where I'm going to put my legs. And for the legs, what I have is a hen hackle. It's got some I picked one that's got a little bit of a white center and some dark bits. And I'll pick a feather here that is got barbules that are probably, I'd say, 1.5 times the gap of the hook. Just select one that appears to be about that wide. Take the hackle out. And I'll take all the fuzzies off the bottom here, completely off the bottom. So all I've got is a stem. And then what I'll do is I will grab it by the tip, wet my thumb and forefinger, and I will pull them back, pull the feathers back from the tip, like that. Because what I'm going to do now is tie this hackle in by the tip. So I've prepared, this is the key to these wet hackle flies, is to tie that in by the tip. And I'll place the feather on the near side of the hook with the tip pointing down and wrap right over that gap between the front of the hackle and the back. Then I'll take the tip and pull it up and make a couple of wraps in front. And when I've done that, I need to get in with my scissors. So I'll take that tip, get in with my scissors, and carefully nip out the tip. Now that's nice and secure. Take my hackle pliers again and grab the butt section of the feather here by hackle plier. Gently lift it up so that the feather is like that. Wet my thumb and forefingers again, and I will fold the hackle in half around the stem, like that. And then I'll make a wrap right in the front of the peacock thorax. And I'll just use my thumb and forefinger again to make sure that that hackle which came out. Let's try that again. We'll go through this again. I didn't get a good enough wrap on there, so it pulled out. The hazards of doing these feathers that it may have broken too. These are pretty fine feathers. And so you end up with a stem that's not really robust. So I'll just really quickly get that prepared. Again, by the tip. Try again. Spit. We'll get an extra wrap in there. Hopefully it'll stay this time. Get my scissors in and snip the tip off. There you go. Okay, hackle. So back to where I was before. The trick here is to fold the hackle back like that and to continue folding that as it goes around the hook shank. And the purpose is that you don't want to trap any of these little barbules of the hackle underneath or each subsequent wrap. You want them to spread out all around the fly. And so that requires you to keep stroking the material back. And when you get them on there, you probably get about 3 wraps on these small flies. And then you bring your thread up and catch the stem. And I'm going to just pull that whole stuff back with the stem still attached. and make a wrap in front so it doesn't come unraveled. And I hold the stem up now and that I've trapped it, and I just come in here with the edge of my scissors and take it off. I stroke back with thumb and forefinger again around behind, just behind the eye, and build a small head. Just to force that hackle backwards a little bit. And then it's whip finished. And that's him. Get in there with the edge of my scissors and trim that. And then just a little bit of Sally Hansen's on the head. And when you do that, you run the risk of filling up the eye of the hook with glue. And that's where having this little tip of the hackle around is handy, because I can take that and I can push it through the eye of the hook and remove the glue that's stuck in the eye. And that's it. That is a soft hackle emerger. And you can do all sorts of different colors and stuff. These hen hackles are really easy to do this. You can do that with partridge as well, to make these leggy hackles in the front. And that's it. So let me just take me off speaker view here again. There we go.
Thank you, Dave. Classic stuff.
So that's a very classic wet fly. And they're pretty effective, actually. Fish them on a light leader. Fish them in the surface film or just below the surface film. And if I'm thinking that we'll probably see, now that we've got the ice is about to go off their ants, apparently. They had a little bit of skiff ice up there. This is supposed to be a good time to catch the early season mayflies. So it might be worth trying some soft hackle wet flies up at Thorax when you get up there. Here we go. So Florin, you're up.
Yeah. Another wet fly.
Mm-hmm.
This one is called a goat's toe. I have no idea what the history of this thing is, but it uses it came up in conversation last week as I was struggling with tying something with peacock's word, which is not easy to handle. And in the process, I remembered I had some peacock body feathers. And so somebody suggested that the goat's toe would be a nice fly. So I looked it up, and here it is. So this is one of the variants that I've tied. So this time, instead of saltwater hooks, I'm going to be using freshwater hooks. So these are Mustads 3906s. And what I'm tying on today is going to be a size 8 hook. So I have the usual thing. I've debarbed my hook already. And I'm just going to put it in the vise first. And then I'll explain the other ingredients. There's a bit of, it's always doing a little bit of preparation beforehand is helpful. Okay, so we've got our hook debarbed here. And now for the ingredients. One of the ingredients is yarn. So this is a multi-strand yarn. So I'm going to separate a few bits out of this yarn. So what I did is I cut myself a piece of yarn from this, and yours may be thicker or thinner depending on what you have. you'll have to adapt. And I pulled one single strand, which I'm going to use for the ribbing, and I left the rest together for tail. Now, to make this, because you can see there are about 3 strands here, they're still distinguishable. To make this into a better material for a tail, I took a little bit of Velcro on a stick and just brush this. It's better to do it beforehand, you know, before you tie this onto the fly. So now it looks nice and fuzzy, as you can see. Okay. So that's for preparing the some of the body materials. Now for preparing the peacock feathers, mine are a bit old and a little bit brittle when I try to strip the fluff off. So not to break the stems when I strip the fluff off, I took a little bit of water at the bottom of a plastic cup here, and I let them soak for a little. And so then what happens is you take your feather from the water, and it looks like a, I don't know what a wet peacock in the rain looks like. Probably not as bad as this. And you just strip the fluff off. As you can see, it does come off nicely. Strip both sides. And my stem is still alive. Of course, it sticks to the finger, so it's hard to dispose of it. And then this is the good part of the feather, but I don't need as much, so I'm going to strip a little bit more here, these longest fibers on this side. And then I'm gonna try to size this up a little bit. So this is still fairly wet. Separate the fibers and decide whether this particular feather has short enough fibers to tie on as kind of standard wet hackle. So using the full feather. This is a bit of on the long side unless you deliberately are trying to tie something with very long wings or very long hackle like this, right? So this one is probably best for this size hook. I'm going to do a different thing. I'm just going to tie these fibers and fold them back to get myself a different hackle, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. Okay, I have 2 hooks prepared here, so I'm going to do the hackle in two different ways. I'm going to set this one aside. I'll show you another feather that I prepared here that's got a little bit shorter, I think, fibers. You can see this one here, sizing it up. And this looks like it's a better size. It's just a little bit longer than shank length. I'm going to use this one for one hook and then the other one for the other hook that I just cleaned up. And, you know, if you tie more of these, just, you know, prepare a few feathers and put them aside in a container, and then you're always ready to go. Okay, now the actual tying, once all the preparation is done, the actual tying is quite straightforward. So this one I'm going to do depends on, you have to decide how you're going to use the hackle that you've got. So if you tie traditional wet style, you're going to start at the head of the fly with the thread, and then go to the bend of the hook. And now I'll take the tail material, measure this shank length, and attach. Then I'm going to take the one strand that I separated for rib. I'm going to attach that alongside. And go back into the bend of the hook so I can attach the Peacock Herl. For the body, I'm just using Peacock Herl from an eyed feather. And these are kind of, this is a slightly, I have different sizes of feathers. This is usually on an eyed feather, so on a tail feather from a peacock. This is where you find the premium pearl. Given I'm using peacock body feathers, which are not exactly easy to come by, I'm not going to be going cheap here on the Herl, so I'm going to use the premium stuff as well. It's quite fluffy, so a bit goes a long way. And although this is a size 8 hook, I'm just gonna use 2 strands. It's also a little bit tougher at the tips than some of the other stuff. So I trimmed off the very tips of the Herls. I only have 2 of them. And I'm going to wrap them without any other tricks like dubbing loops or anything else, because I have a rib that's going to secure the Herl to the body. And I just want to make sure that I tie down all that fluff. Then move my thread forward about 1 eye length behind the eye. And okay, I did speak out of turn. I did break the Herl. Oh well. Going back. Let's try again. So take the Herl and wrap forward. And as you can see, this is nice and fuzzy. You don't need a lot to build a nice looking body. Okay, so when you get to the point where you want to tie in the hackle, you just secure 2 wraps on top of the Herl and then 2 more wraps in front. Trim and then rib the fly. Now for ribbing, to get this to look nice, you want to twist this material a little bit, okay? So I'm going to twist this in the direction that would keep it twisted while you're wrapping. You just probably have to do a little bit of experimenting to figure out exactly what that is. I'm not going to say clockwise or counterclockwise because it really depends on whether you're left-handed, right-handed, which direction you're looking at the whole contraption from, and so on and so forth. Okay, same thing, 2 wraps on top, 2 wraps in front, and it's all secured. Now I'm going to get the feather and I am going to tie the hackle on. And this is going to look very similar to what Dave just showed with his wet fly. So this is what the length is going to be. Let's see if I have a slightly smaller feather here. Yeah, this would be a better size. Okay. So here's the feather. And what I do is, and if this proves to be difficult, just moisten your fingers now that you have your feathers soaking in water. Just get a little bit of water on your fingers and stroke these fibers back. And also this tip. This will make tying in and wrapping and folding the hackle so much easier. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to tie this on shiny side up. So point it forward at a bit of an angle and securely wrap over it. Okay. If you want to be super secure here, you fold that tip back and you wrap 2 or 3 turns over it as well. Okay. I didn't go quite back. Okay. So see, this really locks it in. And then trim. Okay. Now I'm going to use Hackle pliers because it gives me better control over what I'm doing. Those of you with, more agility or dexterity can do this just with your hands. So now I have my wet hackle and I am stroking these fibers back. As you can see, they're folding up nicely. Okay. And I'll start turning. And this is where the hackle pliers for me come in very handy, because if the feather is trying to twist, I can fairly easily compensate for that. Okay, so just keep folding the hackle, keep turning, closely spaced turns. And you get that nice swept back look that you want with a wet fly. And then when you come to the end, it helps to trim the feather also to pull off all the fibers, although it may look wasteful at first. If you precise your feather, you end up with the amount of hackle that you wanted. Otherwise, you're tempted to do one more wrap, and that one more wrap is going to overload the hook. Then just lock this in, same procedure. Fold the stem back so that it gets nicely locked in inside your thread wraps. And then separate it from everything else and go in there with your scissors. Oops, and cut your thread like I did. Brilliant. Okay, so let's try to save this before it's too late. Use the little threader here. Put the thread back. And now we got thread again. Now let's just go in here where the thread was cut and wrap over without touching anything else, because pulling on things at this stage might start an unraveling process, which we don't want. So then I'm gonna yank this extra thread off. And now I can get my fingers in here again and wrap over it. Okay. So a lot of times when you cut the thread off accidentally, I can't claim I did this intentionally just to demonstrate. When that happens, if you've done everything else right up to that point, there's a very good chance that things are not going to start unraveling right away. So just don't panic, rethread your bobbin, or even better, have a second bobbin at hand if you're prone to this kind of mishap more frequently. And then go back exactly where you started without trying to disturb the materials as little as possible, because that will give you a chance to start tying again and not have things come undone. Okay, so one whip finish, two whip finishes. Okay, let's take a look around here and see whether this looks okay. Yeah. Oh, longer tail, bushier hackle. That's one way of doing this fly. If you find this tail is too long, you can always go there and snip a little bit more. Okay. We should get some sponsorship here for Sally, from Sally Hansen's, because we've been, you know, I could use a free case of this stuff. Because it's really very useful. I use it on all the flies, coating bodies, all kinds of stuff. Okay. Give this a spin just because it looks cool when it spins, and then put it aside. And let's do one more. Now, the second fly, I'm going to do it because I want to demonstrate a slightly different technique. So same size hook, same as in the previous fly. You can, of course, vary materials a little bit as well. So, okay. I got carried away talking. Now there's something important to do this time. So now I'm going to use a feather that I would consider to be too long, or maybe I just want to tie the next fly with a shorter hackle that doesn't go as far back, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the thread a little bit further back. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm deliberately leaving some bare shank. And the reason for leaving some bare shank is quite simple. And that is because I want to be able to spin some of this peacock onto that shank. So what I have now is, let me take a feather that's even longer than that. So you have something like this. Clearly, these fibers are way too long for that size of hook, as you can see, right? And so then what do you do in a situation like this? Well, you measure, you take your feather. Now I have to pay attention to a couple of things. Now I'm going to tie it in with you can see the curvature here, I think, right? So tied like this so that when I fold the fibers back, which is what I'm going to do at the end, these fibers are going to still sweep back nicely and curve towards the inside of the fly, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my feather. I'm going to measure the length that I want. So let's say I want a little bit longer than the shank. And then I'm going to put it here. I'm going to bring that thread exactly at the point. Now it's black, it's not very easily visible. If you look very carefully, the thread is exactly at the point where the bare shank begins. And this is where I'd like to tie in my feathers. So now, in fact, you want to do a bad job of attaching this, right? So put your thread loosely around, so you can see how this is starting to twist around the hook. That's exactly what you want. So yes, this is the effect. This is the desired effect, okay? And go forward and give it some encouragement if you know, from too much practice attaching things to hooks, things end up looking too good. You want it twist around the hook, okay? If you put a thread base, then the hackle is gonna try to stick to the thread, right? This is what we normally do when we attach hackles. We put a thread base, and then we put whatever material we put, and then with waxed thread, most of the time, unless you're using some very slippery thread that's unwaxed, things are gonna just stick exactly where you put them. And that's what we want most of the time, but not in this case. All right. Now I want a tail, and you can vary the color here as well. So red is a standard. Another standard is Chartreuse. What I'm going to use this time, because I've been playing with different materials here, Actually, no, I still have some of this stuff. I'm gonna use the other one for the rib. So again, I have the unfuzzied yarn. I'm just gonna take the Velcro here and give it a good brushing. So just separate all the fibers that I can separate in that yarn. There you go. Put this on. And then I also need the rib. And what I'm going to use for rib this time is some of this pink flashy stuff, which I think looks pretty cool. And this is one of these Krynic flash in a tube. And this is a Sockeye Pink UV. Okay. So anyway, it's a very fluorescent looking hot pink kind of stuff. And I just pull one strand. I don't need much of this. I'm gonna fold it twice to give me a little bit of body. So now I have 4 strands after folding it twice. And if I have unruly tips, I just trim here and attach to the hook shank. And then move thread back. Now on this eye, I'm these are more suitable to smaller hooks. So I'm just gonna get a bigger feather here. Now we're talking. You can see here, this is a much bigger feather. Nice, long, fluffy, beautiful Peacock Herl. Yeah, if you want to work with the best Peacock Herl, there's no substitute for full tail feathers. So I suppose you just have to lurk around weddings and see if any decorations involve peacock or pheasant tails, which it seems to be a big market for these things. And then help with the cleanup process. This is almost, you can see this is almost too much. So I'm doing everything same as before, so I'm not going to explain all of that again. And then here again, I'd like to use these rotary hackle pliers because what they do for me is they allow me to twist the yarn, or in this case, this flashy material. So give it a good twist. So it's a ropey kind of rib. Secure. This is a little bit buried inside the Peacock Herl now, but once the fly gets wet, it's gonna start to stand up. So now what I need to do is I need to get in front here, and I'm trying to avoid trapping fibers when I move the thread forward. So what I do then is I just pull these fibers back, fold them back. And, you know, if things are misbehaving, again, get your fingertips a little wet. And that's going to help with folding the hackle back. This is going to be harder than what I did before because now the fibers are pointing forward. So you really have to bend them 180 degrees rather than just 90 degrees on the stem. Okay. And then once you're satisfied that everything is where it should be, build a little thread dam right in front of where you folded the hackle. If you want them to be here, you have to be careful because you don't want to go too far back and trap too many fibers under the thread because that will give you kind of matted fibers along the body. So you want a little bit of standing up for those feathers. Okay. So, and here's another advantage to use the thinnest thread you can get by with. So I'm using 8/0 thread on a size 8 hook, but that allows me to do more wraps without creating huge bulk here on the head of the fly. Oh, I already did 2 whip finishes. I just get carried away. Doing whip finishes is so much fun then. Okay. So here's cut the thread. And I suppose that's a bit overkill at this point. But I'm just going to put a little bit of cement here. Just a little bit around, try not to get in the eye. The way to do this is early on, you just open your bottle of Sally Hansen's, and the first thing you do is go get yourself a paper towel, wipe the brush dry, take some of your lousy scissors and cut it down to a fraction of what it was originally. And that'll give you a thin brush that allows you to do, at least on a size 8 fly, you can do this. And that's another way of tying the same fly. And as you can see, this one has got much more of a standing hackle than the previous one.
How would you fish it, Florin?
I would fish this like any other wet fly, swing it. The traditional, so this is supposed to be a fly that's good for browns. And the way they seem to be fishing this in Scotland and Ireland is as a lock fly, as a point fly on a 3-fly cast kind of thing, and swing it through choppy water close to the surface. I would want to try this. I've tied some on saltwater hooks as well, and I'd like to give this one a try for sea run cuts. I showed it to some people on Tuesday who said, oh, that would work on pinks, that would work on, coho, whatever. Just use it on a suitably strong hook. Use it like you'd use any other fly. In a stream, I would swing this like a wet fly. In a lake, I would fish it either on the surface. I mean, not so much on the surface because this is a heavy hook, right? This is a heavy wire hook. But if you fish this on a floating line and you just let the weight of the hook pull the fly down and let it swing, if you have a bit of a breeze on the lake and you're just gently drifting down, I would do that. I would give it the occasional twitch. Otherwise, put it on a sinking line and strip it like you would with other flies.
Yeah, that's
To your point earlier, when you were tying the first fly, Florin, about the breaking the thread, one of the things that I do many times is when I finish tying in a material, I do a couple of half hitches. That
Oh,
way,
yeah.
if I
Yeah.
break my thread, the worst is going to be that the last material I tied in will come off, or the material that I'm tying currently will come off, but you can continue again where you last locked in.
Absolutely, and I think when in the olden days when people were tying in hand, doing a half hitch after each step was a standard. So there were two ways of keeping your thread from unraveling. One was actively waxing the thread before you start tying, and if your thread is freshly waxed, then it's going to stick to itself much better than the pre-waxed thread. And the second one is exactly what you said. So if you read through any older books on fly tying, you'll get this advice, and I think that kind of made it not an issue. You know, cutting your thread. Well, nobody was using bobbins to begin with. You just have a piece of thread and you wax it and you go ahead and tie with it. And I remember reading in one of these old books, this author saying, well, you know, sure, there are these vices and contraptions out there, but they're not that good, because, you know, if you want to tie a fly and you need some good light to tie, just go and stand in an open door and get some good light to tie your fly, rather than being bound to a desk in the darkness where you don't have good light. So it was kind of interesting, right, to read something like that, where it's true, I have 2 lamps on my desk here, and otherwise I would probably want to stand closer by the window, somewhere where I have decent light, so I could tie the fly. And I think this is what you just saw here, is something that the old timers would have tied in hand, no problem. You know, like they would tie complex Atlantic salmon flies in hand. This would be a walk in the park. I haven't tried that though.
Yeah. So these these soft hackles are useful for any time there's an emerging insect, either on a lake or on a stream, because the nymph at the bottom eventually has to, you know, transform into a different version so they can get to the surface. And that's usually what they're talking about for these wet flies, is it's the insect that's coming up to hatch as an adult. So the you know, typical stage is you've got a little worm on the bottom, or like a bloodworm or something, that turns into a chironomid, that turns into an emerging insect, which turns into the adult. So they're all kind of the same form of the mayfly and other insects that go through that metamorphosis process. For those who want to follow the details of the tying that I did today, if you can get a hold of the autumn issue of Fly Tyer Magazine, it gives you the individual steps in photographs.
Is that the autumn 2024?
Yeah. Okay. And for next week, I'm going to do the previous stage, which is a hare's ear. Yeah, that's in this month's issue of Fly Tyer. And the reason I'm going to do that is that I actually have a couple of good old hare's masks, and I'll take it right from the mask of the hare and show you how to do the dubbing stuff and get that going, as to how you tie the traditional hare's ear nymph.
Sounds good.
I have not decided on a fly for next week just yet. I'll have to give it some more thought. I was thinking of trying to follow this procedure of using oversized hackles to tie smaller flies, into playing with a little bit of like partridge hackles to try to tie some size 16, for example.
Mhm.
Partridge and orange, which is one of the most useful little wet flies you can have.
Yeah. And
And size
pretty effective
16 would
pattern,
be a good one for you know, if you have chironomids happening early season or anything like that. That would be a good application.
yeah, so that's what we'll do for next week. In the meantime, I'll just stop the recording here. We can still chat, but I can get it.
So so if you talk about the hare's ear nymph, I'm just looking at